this story is not about Sheogorath, although it is tied to him. This is about faith born from the culture of the Shivering Isles. I will tell you about what components of his realm inspired creation of this faith. Madness worship. In the times before Sobek was the high priest, he was playing the game The Elder Scrolls for Oblivion, his favorite DLC, Shivering Isles. He wished to understand everything about the life and mindset of the people, and he did, and thought, hey, one could make a religion out of this. And he made. First he struggled to understand what was mania and what was dementia. He headed to the gates and defeated the gatekeeper. As he gathered the keys from his lifeless body, he entered. He found that the realm proper is split to two contrasting duchies, mania and dementia. The differences lie not only in the decorative aspect, but also in minds of the inhabitants. The maniacs like to spend some time in imaginary worlds described in books. They also indulge in fanatical love and art, including the art of poetry. Some of them like to put a show for others. And of course, they adore a good vibe. As the name itself suggests, maniacs are mind-oriented. They all pursue pleasure in this form or another, and that pleasure is one of mind, which is opposed to philosophy of the demented. Sobek abandoned beautiful places of mania and entered the demented side of the Isles. Dark, mossy, wet, full of pain and pain lovers, gluttons and addicts, people who love touch, fighting, exercise, like the cutter, who has a very gruesome obsession which she practices on herself, or Caldana Monrius, who doesn't like the light of day, who loves to drift into the world of her dreams, who tries to escape reality with sleep and with skooma. Although reality is not even chasing after her, nobody wants to hurt her, no one even cares, but she thinks otherwise. Alike to Heros Clutumnus, who believes that the world is after himself and hates him. He was shown pity by a magician, but he refuses that. Do not be fooled by him, as he is actually happy, because his depression and sadness are self-induced and he finds comfort in his pain. It became apparent to Sobek that mania is about the joy of mind while dementia is about the joy of flesh. It may be not obvious, but even if there is mental torment, it still counts as bodily pleasure because torment causes adrenaline rush, and adrenaline is physically, bodily addictive. At first Sobek was confused. Maniacs also use drugs, but then he realized that maniacs use drugs for inspiration, for ideas, while the demented use drugs for the pain and suffering, for the spice of their life. Later he learned of the idea of 6 elements. Why would they even matter in lives of the mad men and mad women? But then he found correlation.
At the beginning of the worlds were five: fire, water, earth, air, and light. Darkness turned into day. The void took form. Hidden away by virtue of its own self-awareness was the sixth, containing within it the five which birthed it. Flesh!
Sobek understood that the six elements are components of the mad mind. He produced this symbol to classify the elements that make a mind. The top was madness itself, inspiration, a creative impulse. It is born out of three sacred emotions: rage, rapture, and despair, depicted in the Bajak. The impulse has to turn into a thought, and other four elements are exactly giving the thought a form. Fire, a desire of selfless transformation of something. Fire takes wood and transforms it into ash altruistically. Similar but yet opposed to fire is air. It is a desire to obtain something. The more effort is given, the better the result. But in the end, it is still about receiving. Tornado gives a lot of work, a lot of force into the world, but its goal is to suck everything into itself. Water, the desire to nurture or to initiate a process without directly executing it. Desire to contribute, desire to be a part of something, not being the final actor. A fire is the final actor. A water is a provider of the resource. Soil, the ultimate lazy consumer, the desire to take with minimum or preferably no effort whatsoever, a hoarding desire, a desire to take without giving at all. The reason for the formative elements to be split like this is that fire and water are altruistic. Every deed is done in order to receive something. However, fire and water try to make changes into the world, and the mind affected by these elements predominantly enjoys the effects of their deeds on the world. It is observatory, and thus it is stimulation of mind. Air and soil are extremely selfish, consumptivistic, and it is metaphorically aligned with eating food, with gluttony, devouring for the sake of devouring, pleasure of flesh. Flesh, the final element of physical manifestation, of desire, of the creative impulse, of madness itself. As the thought leaves the crucible of four formative elements, it gains life in neurons. It is transformed into motion of the muscles and in produce of an entity. Thus, the six elements describe how madness affects our life, how madness is the source of everything creative and destructive that we do. And then Thorbeck thought, what makes one a god? Even Sheogorath is replaceable. Then what do we consider as divine? One could say it is an entity that defies laws of physics on will and has an afterlife world. However, we, the mortals of Earth, are not in a video game and not in the world of Mundus. For us, there is no god that answers these criteria, at least his existence is not verified. There can be disputes about what or whom to consider a deity, and Sobek figured out 2 points, 2 criteria, indisputable signs of divinity. The first sign, the deity can make changes to the world and or its components. And the second one, the change must be subject to eyewitnessing. Someone must be capable of witnessing the process of the change in making, a safety measure to verify that someone indeed did something to the world or its components and didn't steal credit. Obviously, a god must not be forced into expression of the divinity, because otherwise it is not an act of creation or destruction, but a labor, a deity being used as a tool of another person, which in itself sounds absurd. How can you use a god for to grant an intoxicating innocence? Sobek understood that by this logic, anyone capable of perception and action can be considered a deity, but only while they are acting upon their own inspiration. And it appeared as a wonderful idea that can enlighten humanity and emphasize value of not only human life but all intelligent life, all life capable of perception, and all life capable of action. And therefore every desire to harm another or harm self or limit freedom of action and thought and belief is a blasphemous attempt to limit expression of divinity of another entity. What a humane and bright value, bright idea. But what is the purpose, what is the reason in action, in desire? Every action of a living being is reinforced by such concept as joy, pleasure, a chemical reaction meant to stimulate, to reward an entity. Thus, the greatest value of the faith must be pleasure, the pleasure of the mad god, which is a person themselves, pleasing the mad god, pleasing the person who is under influence of inspiration, pleasing oneself through expression of divinity, pleasure, the highest virtue. Thus, everything that is associated with gaining pleasure is virtuous by definition. Life itself as continuation of perception, personal freedom, freedom of thought, belief, and action, as the soil essential for the seeds of action to ever come to fruition. Without freedom, there may be no expression of divinity, there may be no creative action. Prolonged lifespan, for the longer a person lives, the longer a person perceives, the longer the perceptive unit exists, and the longer it can act as a mad god, as a deity. Technological progress, as it creates new ways, new tools, and new niches of expression of divinity. Everything opposed to these virtues is sinful. Death is a sin, for there is no evidence for perception to remain after death of flesh. Thus, risking own life or lives of others, as well as dying or killing others, is seen as an act against divinity. Limitation of freedom of action, thought, belief, and personal freedom. It is also sinful because it is direct disallowance for divinity to express itself through actions of a person. And of course, technological stagnation or degradation, as it eliminates outlets and instruments of divine manifestation. Madness is a divine creative impulse. It produces obsession, but indulgence in them is not always safe. Sometimes obsessions turn into addictions. Very deadly addictions. The situation when an obsession takes control over a person and makes them commit a sin is to be called insanity. The madmen and madwomen are meant to indulge in their obsessions, but not risk development of an addiction. Thus, they should always indulge and overindulge in their minor obsessions. This way, they will receive frustration. Repetitive frustration will cause a habit to dissociate from any obsession that develops, for indulgence in it will eventually lead to frustration anyways. Thus, a person can always enjoy life and always be in control of their divinity and not become its own tool. How can a true God be a tool of its own power? What a grand and intoxicating innocence. But what is the source of madness? What spark gives life to the fire of divine madness, of inspiration? Sobek was confused until he looked at the very gates of madness itself. This is the starting point. The gates depict three emotions: rage, rapture, and despair. Sobek understood that a radical manifestation of these emotions is the impulse to act. A person affected by rage desires to eliminate the cause. A person affected by despair desires to eliminate the cause of despair or create such conditions under which the emotion will not be re-invoked. And rapture causes a person to act in preservation of the moment of pleasure or repetition of the pleasurable experiences. The impulse is then to be processed into a thought by either of four processes: altruistic change, altruistic nurturing, selfish exchange, and selfish consumptivism. Fire, water, air, and soil. And then, as the impulse is turned into a thought form, it is set into manifestation in flesh. This way, Sobek received a philosophy, one that can shape mind and life of people, and he decided to share it. He came up with the celebration such as the Mad God's Day, which happens every full moon, and the Communing with Darkness Day, which happens every new moon. He created a virtual space to advertise the faith and to celebrate it with other like-minded and agreed individuals. He came up with a symbol, a common banner to unite the faithful under. It is a head with three emotions that symbolize rage, rapture, and despair. The jester head symbolizes the pursuit of the greatest virtue, joy. The eagle atop the jester head is a symbol of value of the virtue. The symbol is made in white to symbolize the belief that the values of madness worship faith are humane and enlightening. The white symbol rests upon a black shield, the shield of lack of compromise. We stand by our values, we avoid what we consider sin, we are faithful.